Battlefield Bad Company 2. Our old friend. Back in 2010, the gaming sphere was a little bit different to how it is now. For a start, if you wanted a game, you mostly went out to the shop and bought a physical copy, whether that was at GameStop, Game, Walmart, wherever. That's certainly what I did with Bad Company 2. I owned the physical disc, something that's quite rare these days. I mean, for me personally, I don't think I've bought a physical copy of a game for about 3 years now. Initial sales reports for Bad Company 2 were fantastic. Reported as 2.3 million copies sold, it was the top-selling March release title recorded in North America and Europe. And we're quite used to Battlefield titles releasing towards the October-November holiday window, end of the year. But by the end of that May, that same year, the game had shipped over 5 million copies. Again, consider when this game was released. That's a big number. In fact, that number outperformed EA's own expectations. By March 2012, the sales figures had breached 12 million, but I can't really find any accurate sales figures beyond that. I'm sure they've done a couple more million since maybe. The game was no doubt an incredible financial success, but it was also a big hit with fans of the Battlefield franchise and also newcomers experiencing it for the first time. But why? What were the best features of Bad Company 2? I've got my own ideas of why I personally like the game, starting with the most obvious, the destruction. The original Bad Company had destruction too, but it was the second game that really pushed that feature forward, and the fact that it had a great multiplayer element to boot only enhanced it. You could level entire buildings or blow holes in parts of them with grenade launchers. Tank shells would zip across the map and take out half a house. It was just such a cool experience to have back then. Over the years, Battlefield has taken that destruction mechanic, tweaked it, toned it down, increased it, and everything in between, but it's still a staple, a pillar of the Battlefield franchise and a big part of Bad Company 2. It always will be. But just look at how much damage this building can take before it's destroyed. Clean holes in pretty much all of the walls depending on where you fired. Even when the building falls down, it feels really dynamic and you can go over and crawl through the rubble. It's really impressive. When I look back at Bad Company 2 though, the one thing that jumps out to me is map design, but that fits hand in hand with something else that we've got to talk about first: Rush. It's weird to think that Rush hasn't been as well loved in recent years, especially when it comes to games like Battlefield 1 and 5, but Bad Company 2 did Rush right. The main reason I think for that, and why it works so well in this game, was because the multiplayer was largely designed solely for it. The concept of Rush was one of the main game modes of Bad Company 2, and because of that, the maps were specifically designed to make them great for attacking and defending, without destruction in the mix. Maps like Valparaiso or Arica Harbour spring to mind. When you have a concept for a game mode and you design the entirety of the map around it, I think it's safe to say you're going to have a much better experience than if you tried to shoehorn other game modes into that design. Rush felt a little bit like that in BF3 on certain maps and BF4 on most of them. Incredibly, in BC2 the gun balance was very good. I'm not going to say it was perfect because let's face it, it wasn't. There were some outliers like shotguns that could kill you from what felt like a mile away at times, but no game is perfect. What Bad Company 2 did right though was its balance between vehicles and infantry. Tanks and vehicles felt strong like they should, but you had enough tools to take them out when you played as a squad. The player count was also less than the main titles that came before it, Battlefield 2 and 2142. Well, they had 64 players, but Bad Company 2 reduced that to only 32 players on PC. The console versions were even slightly less than that at 24 players. And was that a good thing as it turned out? I'd say one of the best things about Battlefield, one of the signatures, is its massive maps and large-scale warfare. That's what we love about it, right? And what Bad Company 2 did was condense that action down and made it work on a smaller scale. Some of the maps were still quite substantial, mind you, but I don't think they ever felt empty to me. The sound design in this game was also fantastic. Not only could you hear explosions in the distance or bullets whizzing by your ears, but the sound would change when you would enter a building. Audio would echo, making gunfights indoors that much more unique. Things sounded differently depending on where you were and where the origin of the sound was, and alongside audio, you had the visuals. Bad Company 2 was not a bad looking game when it released, and I think that it still holds up fairly well considering it's 10 years old. It wasn't the jump that something like Battlefield 3 had, but at the time it was competing against COD, and it definitely had the visual edge over that. Arguably a big feature that most players loved about Bad Company 2 over anything else though was the gunplay. Different classes had unique weapons, just like they do in all Battlefield games, but back then it was Assault that had the main rifles and Medic had LMGs. There were even World War II era weapons thrown in there for good measure. Guns felt like they had weight to them, and while there was still bloom and weapon spread, the overall gunplay definitely required an element of skill. When you were on a kill streak here, you felt rewarded. This was helped by the movement as well. To be honest, the movement could be seen as a plus or a negative depending on which way you looked at it. In today's standards of video games, especially in Battlefield, movement is really quick and snappy. You can sprint, slide, jump, vault, even double vault. Back then, you couldn't do any of that. While I wouldn't want to go back to a game that didn't even have basic vaulting functionality, it reminds you of how precise you had to be with your actual movements, and I always thought that the gunplay was better for it. Also, not being able to prone made a huge difference, at least to frustration levels if nothing else. Strafing and moving forward could definitely have been improved though. The functionality of that was quite bare, and nowadays it just doesn't feel right. So of course we have to talk about the single player too, perhaps one of the most iconic parts of the whole game in fact. And you control Preston Marlowe, one of the members of a crack unit called Bad Company. This unit is not the most well regarded in terms of ability, and the game uses this to its advantage with a very comedic narrative to the story. It's absolutely one of the best campaigns that the Battlefield franchise has been able to develop, and perhaps the number one in a lot of people's eyes. Just a little tidbit too about playing with friends. It was incredibly easy to join a friend in this game. You had a friends list, you could see what game they were in, click on their name, join game. It was simple, and it worked great. Wrapping things up, on paper you would think that Bad Company 2 was a step backwards in certain respects. No jets, less players. If it released today, I'm sure the player base would be quite vocal about how it was going in the wrong direction. But if Bad Company 2 could prove anything though, it's that perhaps player count isn't everything in a Battlefield game. With a well-structured game, good balance and gunplay, bit of destruction, you can still have a fantastic experience. And when players did try the game, they fell in love. Even to this day, Bad Company 2 is still the favourite game in the franchise for a lot of people. Will we ever see another one? I'm not so sure, but we won't forget. And finally, I have to say that when you go back and play Bad Company, you can definitely notice its age, especially in terms of netcode, but I think it'd be unfair to judge a 10-year-old game by today's standards, but by today's standards of fun, for me, it definitely still holds up. And that's all guys, do let me know down in the comments below what you loved about Bad Company 2. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like. If you didn't, a dislike. Subscribe for more and I'll see you in the next one.